Hey there, my name is Kiri and I'm a flower farmer here in Western Washington in Zone 8A. Today's video is a little bit of a different style. We're going to do a more technical style video where I'm going to show you my tips and tricks to set up a planting plan that actually works to help you build beautiful mixed bouquets during the growing season. This planting plan is going to save you time and money, so let's jump right into it. So what is a planting plan? A planting plan just catalogs your growing space, how much space you have, and then it helps you figure out exactly what plants that you are going to be able to fit in your area that you're growing in. So why is a planting plan important? A planting plan is going to help you save money because you are going to buy the seeds that you actually need. So instead of thinking, oh I like this, and not really considering how those things are going to work together, or if they're going to actually be blooming at the same time, this is a very intentional way of picking seeds that you know that is going to work in bouquets and that you know is going to be available at a certain time that you need them. We're probably flower farmers because we have a seed ordering addiction, and this helps kind of curb that a little bit. The other benefit is that it saves you time. So once you figure out your planting plan, which does take an initial time investment, you don't have to worry about, figuring out, oh, can I fit this in, or will this work later on? You know exactly how many plants you're going to be starting, how many plants that you are going to be planting out, and throughout the season, you don't have to spend your mental capacity trying to figure out those things when you're worrying about harvesting and orders and things like that, because you've already got it all taken care of. So that is one way that it saves you time. The other way that it saves you time are going to spend less time searching for flowers that hopefully will work together in a bouquet at a certain time that you have things blooming. Because at this point in winter, you've already figured out that, X, Y, and Z flowers are going to probably be blooming about the same time, and I'm going to be able to use those together because I already figured out that those colors work. Again, this is kind of front-loading some of your time in your off-season to make sure that in the peak of season, you aren't worrying about how am I going to match these up? Am I going to have anything blooming? None of that is a worry because you've already taken care of it. So the planting plan development process can be broken down into 8 steps. We'll walk through those together step by step, and then afterwards I'm going to show you a live demonstration with my actual summer planting plan to show you what I'm planting and how I figured out what's going to work for me. So let's start with step 1, and this one is more of a creative step. It's really getting that inspiration. So figuring out what colors you like, what kinds of flowers that you like, what kind of aesthetic that you're going for with your flowers. If you're a first-year farmer, I recommend checking out Instagram and Pinterest to find bouquets that you really like and that you're attracted to. If this is not your first year, I recommend looking back at some of the pictures that you've taken of your own bouquets and figuring out what you liked, what you didn't like, what you want to grow more of, and really find some of those bouquets that just were your favorite and that you want to grow again next year. When you're looking at those pictures, I think it's really important to figure out what's in that bouquet. If you can, try to identify what flowers are in that bouquet and what specific varieties are in that bouquet. So as an example, here are bouquets from another flower farmer, and I can identify all of the flowers in that picture. So it looks like there's only 4 different kinds of flowers. There's 2 kinds of sunflowers. There's Pro-Cut White Light and Pro-Cut Plum. And then there's Cosmos, those look like apricota. And then there's Mahogany Splendor, hibiscus as the greenery. I don't see anything else in there. There may be something else in there, but that's a very simple recipe, and that to me is beautiful. Like, I love that. I love the colors in that. I love the textures. So this is what I'm talking about. Find those things that really draw your eye, things that you just really like, and figure out why you like them. Catalog some of those inspiration pictures and kind of find a pattern, right? And if you can, try to stick to like a palette. So for me, this next season, I'm going to a lot of like peachy, maroon colors because those really speak to me, and some of those darker, more moody colors. So this leads into step 2, which is to understand basic bouquet recipes and ingredients. So there's a couple different philosophies on how to set up mixed bouquets. So some of the main ingredients that we typically see categorized are those focal flowers, So that's going to be sunflowers and zinnias. Roses can be focal flowers as well. And then you're also going to see spike, so that's going to be snapdragons and amaranth, really, those pointy spiky things. Then you're also going to see fillers or supporting flowers. So those are going to be those ones that take up bulk in a bouquet. So that would be like yarrow or feverfew, things like that that are a little more bulky. And then the final ingredient is the whimsy, the sparkle, the air, the accent. That's going to be things like gomphrena or dill. Dill is very sparkly in bouquets. I really love it. So if you can identify those ingredients and try to sort flowers into those categories, that can also be really helpful to make sure that you don't have too much of one thing that ends up making it so that you can't make bouquets because you're missing really critical ingredients. Building a mixed bouquet can really be very simple. So you can see, as I've demonstrated here with this example, there's only 3 different ingredients in here. There's focals, which are the sunflowers, right? There's an accent or kind of a filler, which is the cosmos, and then there's greenery, which is the mahogany splendor hibiscus. This flower farmer really understands what you need to build a great bouquet that is simple and achieves that goal. There's all kinds of resources out there to learn about bouquet recipes. So Florette's books are great. If you don't want to buy the books, her blog has a lot of free information about bouquet recipes. The Floral Design School, I think it's called. I'll put a link down below. She does a really great job of describing all of those different design elements that you need in color theory and things like that. So now that you have your inspiration and you kind of know the design direction that you would like to go, the third step is to gather data. When I say gather data, I mean really understand what kind of microclimate you're growing in and what kind of varieties are going to do well for you. My advice to you is don't waste your time growing things that you think aren't going to do well. When you're researching varieties to grow, I would suggest that you also figure out how many stems you're going to get from that plant. So are they one and done like most sunflowers, or are you going to be able to keep cutting on them again and again during the season like zinnias? The other thing to figure out is when they're going to bloom. So the days to maturity is kind of a suggestion, but it is going to give you a ballpark idea of when those flowers are going to bloom for you. So some flowers are going to bloom a lot earlier in the season. If you're expecting to make Cosmo and Status bouquets in July, you might have a hard time with that because those aren't really going to be blooming at that time. Cosmos will, but Status might not be. The other thing to consider is spacing requirements. So some plants take up quite a bit of space, and some of them you can plant really, really close together and get a lot of production out of them. The final thing we gather data on is whether those seeds need to be sown under grow lights inside or whether or not they can be sown outside directly into the soil. And this segues really nicely into step 4, which is to understand your limitations. How much growing space do you actually have outside that you can grow in? How much grow light space do you have indoors? Those types of things. So for example, I only have a grow light setup that is large enough to hold 4 72 cell plug trays at one time. So I probably should spend my efforts on plants that can be direct sown outdoors. So I encourage you to kind of do a critical analysis on what your limitations are, how much growing space do you have indoors, outdoors, how much sunlight do you have on your property, how are you going to water those things? Are you limited by any of those factors? On to step 5, where we are finally putting pen to paper and listing out exactly what we want to grow. So this can be very general starting out. We can worry about the colors and the varieties later on, but really we want to start out with flowers that we know we're going to be able to grow well. So considering our limitations and the data that we've gathered in step 4 and 3, we can kind of figure out a general direction on where we want to go. So we can start this list very generally. So I know I want to grow sunflowers and zinnias because those can be direct sown and they are highly productive. And break out your flowers by your categorizations that you're looking for. So some support that I know I like was those cosmos. Again, because I found those in my inspo picture and because I know those can be direct sown and that they're very productive. So once you have your list of flowers that you know are going to do well in your zone, that you really are visually attracted to, and you've got that all listed out, The next step is to kind of start bulking it out into your planting plan. So a general recommendation that I've heard for people who want to grow and sell mixed bouquets is to do 50% of your planting area as focal flowers and then 50% as everything else, all the supporting, the greenery, the fillers, those types of things. And I think it's up to you to fine tune whether that's going to work for you or not. But a benefit of having so much of your growing area dedicated to those fillers and those accents and things like that is because that, to me, is what makes your bouquet varied. So if we go back to the example of the sunflower bouquets that I really liked, imagine if I used a different greenery in this bouquet. So instead of using the mahogany splendor hibiscus, what if I used basil or bouquets? That's going to give a totally different look to this bouquet, right? Your focals for the main growing season are pretty limited. Most people are probably going to grow zinnias and sunflowers and dahlias. Maybe you're going to grow some lisianthus. That's about it. So you're going to get that variety with all those supporting flowers. I like to do this part in pencil so that I can adjust as needed. But I have a growing area that is 4 by 40 foot rows, and I have 8 of them. So if I know that 50% needs to be focals, then I'm going to dedicate 4 rows to focal flowers, and then the rest is going to be all of my supporting flowers. And so last year I grew one row that was a 30 foot by 4 foot row of sunflowers, and I know that that was not enough. I also know that I needed to do larger successions, so more seeds per succession than I did last year because that wasn't enough on a weekly basis. So I know for a fact I'm definitely going to dedicate at least 1 row to sunflowers because that's at least 10 feet more than I had before. I already have an established stock of dahlias, and I am not planning to buy any more than I already have. That's just going to take up an amount of space that it needs to take up, right? I'm not going to have to add or subtract anything from that. Individual dahlia tubers can be planted as close as 6 by 6 inch spacing. So I've already figured out the amount of plants that I have. I can fit that in about a 25 foot area. So I'm just kind of roughly going about, half-ish, a little bit more than half. Zinnias were a really good seller for me last year. They're very productive a little bit later in the season, but I really relied heavily on them, and they did add a lot of variety compared to like the sunflowers and the dahlias. And I had grown about half of a row of those, so I think this next year I'm going to just do a whole row of zinnias because I wanted more than I had, honestly, and they were really great. So just go through and kind of fill out generally what you think, and you can take away later on or add in more later on. So I know I want more basil than I had last year. I didn't actually grow that much, and it's pretty productive. So I'm just going to keep it kind of rough, a third of this greenery. I know I'm spelling bouquets wrong. I just can't remember. Now I've learned it wrong, and it's always in my brain. But just go through and kind of bulk it out. So after you've completed step 6, which is filling in all of the flowers that you want to grow, the next step is to start figuring out how many stems you're going to get from this setup. So here's just a little cheat sheet that I have based on step 3, going through and gathering data. So I know that sunflowers need a 6 by 6 inch spacing, and I get 1 stem per plant because I'm growing the pro cuts. And these are focals, right? So I can go through and I can estimate exactly how many sunflowers I'm going to get out of this 40-foot space. So a quick side note about figuring out exactly how much you can fit in, right? So something that has a 12 by 12 inch spacing is going to be really simple. You have 1 every foot. So since my beds are 4 feet wide, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then they're 40 feet long, so I have 40 plants this way. So you just can multiply the length by the width to get how many plants that you can fit in there. Something that gets a 6 by 6 inch spacing is going to be really simple in that you just double that, right? So twice as many this way, twice as many that way. So that would be 80 by 8, which is 640. And then something like snapdragons that gets a 9 by 9 inch spacing, that can be a little bit trickier to figure out. This is the simple way to think about it. So 9 divided by 12 is 75%, right? So if I know that my length is 40 feet, then I just divide that by 75%, which gives me 53.33, and typically I just round down to whole numbers to make it easy on myself, but you can go as exact as you would like. And then we know this is 4 feet, so we do the same thing here. So I'll just round this down to be 5, so we can figure out the number of plants there. So I'll go through and do that for all of the plants in my planting plan. And then I take my trusty cheat sheet again and look at my plants. So I know I have about 160 zinnias in my planting plan here. So 160 times the estimated number of stems, 7. So then I can figure out how many estimated number of stems I'll get from those plants for the entire season. So I do that for all my different plants, right? And then what I want to do is go through and total up all of the different categories. And you'll notice here that this says including 30% loss. So let's talk about that. So this is something to always consider. In a perfect world, your plant is going to produce so many stems, right? But bugs are going to eat them. You might break some stems when you're harvesting them. Things happen, right? So there should be some kind of loss built into your formula. A lot of people use 20%, but I am very much on an under-promise, over-deliver kind of person. So I'm going to build in a larger loss, especially given this last year that I had where I lost productivity because of the weather. So that's my first year. It was rough. So I'm going to just build in a larger loss. It's up to you to figure out how much you'd like to build in. Based on our planting plan, 250 snapdragons. I know from my cheat sheet, my data collection, that I can get 8 stems per plant. So I just multiply that out to get 2,000 stems. And then I just multiply the total number of stems by 1 minus the loss to find the percentage that I am going to harvest, right, which is 70%. So this is how many sellable stems I'm going to be able to harvest from snapdragons through my whole season. So looking at the planting plan, 160 zinnias. Looking at our cheat sheet, 7 stems per plant. Great, multiply that out and then figure out the loss. Were you expecting so much math in flower farming? So once you've gone through and figured out all of those totals less the loss, you can add it up by category. So here's my actual math for what I have in my real planting plan. Let's take this and actually make it make sense. So this data is great. This estimation is wonderful, but really what does it mean that I'm going to have 1,400 focals in a growing season? Let's go back to thinking about the bouquet recipe. Most of my recipes involve 3 to 5 stems of each item. So like I said, I'm a little bit of a conservative estimator. I like to underestimate and over deliver. So I'm going to just base it on the max that I typically include, which is 5 flowers per bouquet. So we're going to just keep it simple with a 5. So I'm going to divide out my total by the number of stems that I expect to put in a bouquet. So I know I'm going to put 5 sunflowers in a bouquet at a time. I'm going to put 5 gomphrena in a bouquet at a time, right? That's what this is. So once we take our total stems and divide it by the number of that type that we'll put in a bouquet, we get our total amount of bouquets that we can make. At this point, it kind of still doesn't really make sense, right? Like what does this mean for us? Okay, great. I can make 280 bouquets with 5 stems each of focals. Let's make it make sense. This is our total number of bouquets for what period? It's July, August, September, and quite a bit of October for me. So count up the number of weeks that are in these periods that these flowers are going to bloom. And do remember, that not everything's going to be blooming in July, not everything's going to be blooming in October. And at this point, you should have already kind of considered that when you're setting up your planting plan, right? So in July, August, September, and October, I know that I have 17 weeks there. So what I like to do is I like to look at these numbers and look at what is the limitation. Can I make bouquets only with supporting flowers? No, probably not, right? So what is the most important thing for making a bouquet? It's going to be those focals, right? It's pretty hard to have a bouquet that's all accent, support, spike, and greenery with no focals, right? So I want to look at the number of focals that I expect to have and divide that out by the number of weeks that I need to have them, which is 17. And just a disclaimer, this doesn't include my dahlias because I don't plan to sell these in mixed bouquets. So this is just like zinnias and sunflowers pretty much. So if I divide this 280 estimated bouquets by my number of weeks that I plan to sell those bouquets, I get 16. So this is the total number of bouquets per week during this period of time that I can sell bouquets with focals in them, 5 focals each. So for me, I back into my weekly bouquet goal because I am basing my growing plan on this limited amount of space. I'm not saying I want to grow 20 bouquets a week, so I need that much space, right? I'm saying this is how much space I have. How much can I make in here? It's 16. So going back to these numbers, let's consider why there's so much variation here and whether or not that's okay. My number of focals is kind of low, and my lowest number actually is greenery, right, at 232. But does every bouquet need greenery? It's up to you to decide. Do you have greenery elsewhere? You know, perennials or shrubs that you're cutting on. Do you have enough to supplement this to get it up to this number? This planting plan does not include everything that I'm growing on my farm, right? Because I do have some things mixed into my landscape. So just some ways to kind of think about these numbers. The other thing to think about is like, is this too much supporting flowers? Could I take some of this and put it in here? Up that number, decrease this one so that I can make more bouquets. So that's up to you to kind of figure out and fine tune. So now that you've figured out how many bouquets you're going to be able to make, the fun part is going through and picking the specific colors and varieties that you want to grow. So like I mentioned before, I do like to do pretty much all of this in Excel because it's a lot easier and it's easier to keep track of. And so something else I like to do in Excel is look through Johnny's website. That's where I buy most of my flowers. Look through their website, kind of figure out which varieties I'm interested in, take that picture and put it in an Excel, and then kind of put it in my layout, right, how I plan to grow it just visually. And then when I fill that all in, I'll go through and I'll try to actually build those recipes with the flowers. This is a really helpful tool to visualize what your recipe is actually going to look like and to figure out if something that you are trying to grow may not actually be that versatile. So if you're finding that you have purple status and you're trying to put it into your imaginary bouquets and you just can't seem to get it to go with anything besides a certain combination of zinnias and basil, maybe you shouldn't grow that purple status because it's not going to be very flexible for you. So I like to have at least 3 different bouquet recipes that I can combine something into to have that variety, right, to that flexibility, because again, some things aren't going to bloom exactly as you plan them out to bloom. So that's something I learned this last year, is that I'm really not into pastels. And I grew a couple plants that were pastel colored and they just didn't get harvested because I couldn't combine them with anything in a way that I thought was visually appealing. This is a really good point to go back to look at your inspiration photos and to kind of get inspired on like, okay, what colors am I liking? What colors are being combined here? Can I make that work in different ways? And you know, this is also kind of a good spot to step back and think about committing to just a few color palettes based on your market, based on what you like. Alright, that is it for today's video. I hope you found the information helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below and I'll answer them for you. And if you have any tips to share with other people who might be watching this video, feel free to also comment that down below. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you next time.